are these people?
So DeSantis is officially running the race, so to speak. But the NAACP has issued a travel advisory to Florida because of all the cultural issue mess that DeSantis is really trying to make a foul of his state that a lot more people are talking about versus the economics, but we'll get into that. So I want to play this brief news clip just to give you a summary of what's going down, and then we'll get into a little deeper in terms of the actual specifics in terms of the situation. And then I am going to bring up an issue that I think people are not talking about a lot, but I think definitely should be considered in light of this topic. So, so yeah, we're gonna have to go back in time for this, but go ahead and play.
A surprising move tonight from a major national civil rights group, the NAACP, today issuing a travel advisory for the state of Florida. The organization says that under Governor Ron DeSantis, the Sunshine State has become, quote, openly hostile toward African Americans, people of color, and LGBTQ plus individuals. CBS's Mark Strassman reports this comes as DeSantis is set to announce his bid for the White House.
Didn't Fetterman shoot a black guy with a shotgun? Isn't that?
No, he didn't shoot, but he friended a black jogger with a shotgun.
Okay, close enough.
After he called the police.
Yeah, sure.
Florida is starting to feel uncomfortably warm. It's weather, it's politics. The NAACP is broiling. It's targeting the state's $100 billion tourism industry with a travel warning.
Are you telling Black Americans in other states to stay out of Florida?
We're telling travelers beware that you have a state and a state policy landscape that can be harmful to your existence.
In his conservative crackdown here, Governor Ron DeSantis has stirred both content and contempt, blocking a high school AP course in African American studies. Also in schools, bans on teaching gender identity, sexual identity, and critical race theory, and a ban on abortion after 6 weeks.
We do not ever surrender to the woke mob because we've made the state of Florida the place where woke goes to die.
DeSantis points out a record 137 million people visited Florida last year, up nearly 13% over 2021. His spokesperson calls the NAACP's travel advisory a stunt. But among the backlash here, Disney, Florida's largest private employer, just canceled a $1 billion development project. Latino and LGBTQ groups have issued their own travel warnings.
Politics being politics is fine, but it impacts lives.
Heather Wilkie leads Zebra Youth, an outreach group for young LGBTQ people.
It may take years for us to unwind the damage that has been done here in Florida.
The fear factor is real.
100%.
With DeSantis announcing imminently that he's going to run for president, supporters and critics alike say the same thing. If you want to know what he'll do as president, look at what he's done as governor. Nora?
Mark Strassman, thank you so much.
Okay. Well, so, yeah. So basically, in response to all the stuff that we've talked about on this show previously, the NAACP, and so you saw Frederick Johnson, who is the CEO of the NAACP, basically, saying, some mess in regards to this. But he's not the only one who who's also calling for this. So according to the Independent, I wouldn't say unlikely, but I think this just kind of shows how much this family, in a lot of ways, I hate saying this, have kind of fallen from grace. They're definitely in love.
Kind of co-opted and controlled.
Their father, on that side of the family, at least. But Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter condemns Ted Cruz and backs calls for this racist Florida boycott. So this article is written by John Bowden, and he writes, the Texas senator, because I guess Cruz had to put his foot in it too, in
Yeah.
regards to this as well. Used Dr. King's name in his own tweet attacking the NAACP, one of America's oldest and best known anti-racist institutions. So Bowden continues to write. Hold on. Because I have to catch up. There we go. Texas Senator Ted Cruz found himself denounced by the daughter of the late civil rights champion Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on Sunday after he attempted to invoke Dr. King's legacy in order to attack the modern incarnation of the anti-racism movement. Mr. Cruz used Dr. King's name in his own tweet attacking the NAACP, one of America's oldest and best-known anti-racist institutions. The Texas Republican took issue with the organization after it issued a travel advisory warning about Florida's far-right turn under Governor Ron DeSantis, in particular efforts to ban what he calls woke lessons in schools, which most experts on the issue say is really about erasing teachings about the struggle for civil rights and racial equality in America. The advisory came as a result of an ununanimous vote by the NAACP's board. Florida is openly hostile towards African Americans, people of color, and LGBTQ+ individuals. Before traveling to Florida, please understand that the state of Florida devalues and marginalizes the contributions of and the challenges faced by African Americans and other communities of color, the advisory states. Mr. Cruz responded on Twitter to a conservative publication's write-up of the issue and wrote angrily, "This is bizarre and utterly dishonest. In the 1950s and 1960s, the NAACP did extraordinary good helping lead the civil rights movement. Today, Dr. King would be ashamed of how profoundly they have lost their way." But Dr. King's daughter, author and activist Bernice King, retorted that her father would be strongly opposed to conservative efforts to whitewash American history, as well as the campaign against LGBTQ+ Americans currently consuming the far right. "What my father would be deeply concerned about is the harmful discriminatory legislation in Florida," she wrote. And actually, if you zoom out, you can see that exchange on Twitter right there. Oops. He wasn't the only person to take issue with the senator's tweet. A Democratic former member of New York's congressional delegation, Mondaire Jones, remember him?
Yeah.
District got redrawn and he got booted. But anyway, was less subtle in his approach as he pointed that Mr. Cruz would have fought desegregation efforts in the 50s and 60s. "We know exactly which side you would have been on in the 1950s and 60s, Ted," wrote the congressman turned CNN contributor. The NAACP's president, Derek Johnson, further explained the organization's decision in a statement. "Under the leadership of Governor DeSantis, the state of Florida has become hostile to Black Americans and in direct conflict with the democratic ideals that our union was founded upon. He should know that democracy will prevail because its defenders are prepared to stand up and fight. We're not backing down, and we encourage our allies to join us in the battle for the soul of our nation," said Mr. Johnson. Well, Jesus Christ. Like, notice how he's using
grandstanding. Yeah.
Actually, it's kind of similar language I heard tonight as well from the squad. But Mr. DeSantis' team, meanwhile, issued a response calling the advisory a stunt for attention.
Which it kind of is. I mean, it's a stunt to try to economically hurt his chances, right? And to make him like, he also recently announced his presidency, like he's going to try to run for president. So,
right.
They're trying to get out in front of this. And this is helpful to anyone running against him. So,
well, here's the thing, like, now that DeSantis is officially running, and we had debates before on whether DeSantis could beat Trump. And I think initially I definitely said, and I definitely can eat my words now, I definitely told you that I felt like DeSantis had a chance. And
he's trying to play himself as an outsider, and he just isn't one, is the issue.
Well, the issue is that for him, like, what made him popular was how he dealt with the pandemic economically. that's what made him popular. But now, and I'm not sure why he's doing this, he's kind of shifted to this cultural mode of kind of attacking, these
right-wing.
issues.
It's as close as he can get to right-wing populism because he thinks that's what his populace actually gives a crap about.
Right.
Except we don't.
No. Again, it's like the idea that he did well because Florida during the pandemic was essentially open. And people, for the most part, compared to other states that were closed, was actually doing pretty well. And COVID cases were actually way less compared to the northern states that actually closed up a majority of things. So yeah, it doesn't make sense to me as to, and that whoever's advising him, I'm not sure why they would kind of make the suggestion for him to kind of switch into more cultural issues that people care less about. We care about them when you don't have policy, or you don't have when you don't have economics to talk about because you don't do shit. That's what you go to, is cultural issues. That's what the Democrats are doing right now on the other side as well. So it's just kind of weird that DeSantis would also make that move, and he's now becoming less popular, and Trump is going to use that against him, fairly certain. He already has in the few interactions he's had with DeSantis. So all of that to say, so going off of economics, because as I said, I really didn't want to talk about this story in terms of the cultural issues, because it to me is just a non-story. But then I found on Monday morning this article from Yahoo, written by Marquise Francis, and he writes, Florida NAACP urges Black people not to visit its state. Critics worry the plan will backfire. The NAACP Florida State Conference voted unanimously in favor of a travel advisory. The recommendation will be reviewed by the national board next month. So he wrote this in April. So the NAACP, at least, in Florida, had been talking about this for a while. I'm not going to read this whole article, but he does bring up a good point that I think might be lost in this conversation. And again, it's in terms of economics, especially for Black people who are living in the state of Florida. So I'm only going to pull a few places within this article. If you want to read the full article, the link is in the description. But Marquise writes, but some critics are concerned that an advisory will have unforeseen consequences on the very group that it's intended to help, Black Floridians. Richey J. Daniel Barnes, an anthropology and African American studies professor at the University of Florida, told Yahoo News that she believes an advisory does exactly what government officials want, which is to keep out those that disagree with them and foster an exclusive environment of only like-minded individuals. If the people I came here to work with and build community with leave, which they have already started, I am encouraged to do so as well, she said. Florida is home to more than 22 million people, 17% of whom are African American, according to the latest census data. Barnes, a recent transplant herself, believes that telling Black people not to visit or live in Florida sends the wrong message. This is political theater, she said, adding that a more solution-oriented response requires more people in the form of voters and more dollars in the form of economic prosperity and potential campaign contributions for minority candidates in communities of color. Melba Pearson, a Miami-based civil rights and criminal law attorney specializing in policy, calls the travel advisory a last resort. As the legal redress chair of the NAACP South Dade branch, Pearson said that it's the organization's responsibility to warn Black residents and visitors that Florida is no longer a safe and welcoming place.
But
it's something that we
like
I mean, I went it last month.
Right.
I was fine.
Like, yeah, no one tried to lynch you or like, you know, like, yeah, the police probably aren't going to be kind to you, but you know,
Right, but you can make that case in America, not just
right.
Florida. Florida is not any
Yeah,
different compared to,
yes.
like me living in DC or like anywhere else in the country, you
Right.
know? It is something that we do not come to lightly. This is after we tried all our methods of advocacy, education, and dialogue, Pearson said in an email to Yahoo News. I entirely disagree with, don't believe that at all.
Yep.
But we'll continue. All diplomatic routes have been exhausted, and hopefully the threat of losing the millions of dollars of disposable income that Black tourists bring to Florida every year will reignite dialogue leading to policy change. Right. If successful, this would be the second time a statewide advisory was put forward. You talked about this with me yesterday.
Yep.
The first was in 2017 when the organization issued a travel advisory for Missouri to warn Black visitors that their civil rights would be violated if they entered the state. This move came after multiple instances, including a Black man dying while being held in the Missouri jail, and the passing of SB 43, which made it harder for employees to prove unlawful discrimination based on race or gender.
Like, this makes sense. Like, this,
right?
Like, that I get. Like,
right.
You know, so, but that's not what's been talked about in Florida, which I guarantee you prisons are doing this, you know,
right?
Like, I would say that, like,
right.
You know, it's not like it's Mississippi is still, you know what I mean? Like, when it was burning,
right?
Like, so, but
the NAACP also cited a number of instances of discrimination towards young African American men and women on college campuses that went unaddressed. This all came just 3 years after the fatal police shooting in Ferguson of 18-year-old Michael Brown, whose killing sparked public outcry and became the catalyst of many present-day protest movements. Also makes sense.
Which we'll get into in a story later tonight.
All right, zoom out, please.
Yep.
While there is no data publicly available to quantify the impact of that first advisory, Pearson said, spreading knowledge about the issues facing Black people, particularly in Florida, is paramount. We've always felt that knowledge and education is power, empowering people to make their own decisions with the requisite information is our core mission, she said. That is something that will never change.
You know what this story speaks to me of?
What?
This.
Unity doesn't represent what you're against. It represents what you are for.
Thank you.
The NAACP is against and trying to get you to be against DeSantis, which that's not a hard sell, in my opinion. Right. Like,
no, it's all fear-based.
What it could be for, which is like, oh, justice, defunding, and like any of those things, like any of the actual problems Florida's actually having, what you would like to see done to fix those problems. That's what you should be focusing on.
And actually, you great segue, because this is exactly where Marquise gets into in terms of Black businesses.
Right.
Black-owned businesses in tourist-heavy regions may be the hardest hit if an advisory is put into effect. Vicki Jones, owner of Jones Easy Barbecue in Fort Myers Shores, told Wink News, a CBS affiliate in Southwest Florida, that she believes her restaurant could fare well regardless because of how long it's been a staple in the community, but she's hesitant to embrace the message behind the advisory altogether. As a Black-owned business, I can't say don't come to Florida because I am in Florida, she said. And I like unity. I like community. I like for us to be together and have a voice. Shania Atkins, owner of Nikki's Place Southern Cuisine in Orlando, said that despite having built a strong reputation for almost 2.5 decades, she feels like any kind of advisory would be devastating to her business. It would be very, very detrimental to us because everyone who comes from out of town, they really do support us in a way that some of our locals can't support all the time, she told WESH, an NBC affiliate in Orlando. As a native of Tampa, Lewis, the Hillsborough County chapter president, sees a possible hit to Black-owned businesses as a sacrifice worth making. Black business owners are going to have to stand for something, she said. If you continue to sit and say it'll pass through, we'll get over it, it's going to get worse. Lewis also believes this is a great opportunity for Black people within the state to begin patronizing more Black businesses. If you're serious about change, then it is a time for all of us to come together, she said. If it's important to keep that hotel running, then trust me, it will be important for them to get Black folks to work and for Black folks to maintain their job. While Barnes, the UF professor, understands the impetus behind the travel advisory, she feels that its effects are short-sighted at best. It is difficult to me to see how telling people not to come will bring forth help, she said. We need more people to stay here, move here, and see a reason to make changes here. Most of the help that is needed is in the form of votes. I disagree with that. Most of the help you need is in terms of direct action.
Thank you.
And you can do that, and I think you have the means to do that, especially with these Black owners who are basically, in a lot of ways, are saying, you know, we need direct action in terms of having Black people who live in their communities actually use them, right, and not just necessarily rely on tourists coming in to make up for the slack, but also using that, again, economics to kind of make that push in terms of calling out the NAACP in terms of this travel advisory that it will be harmful to their business, as well as DeSantis, who, you know, like, basically you can argue that during the pandemic, that's what he prided himself on, was keeping Florida afloat. And now that, you know, essentially if this advisory is going to affect revenue in the state, then that's going to be a problem.
The issue is, does it? I don't think it does. I don't think anyone necessarily listens to what the NAACP, like, you know, like, does it? Would that stop you from coming? You know what I mean? Like,
no, I told you.
Like, who does that stop? Now, does it affect what they've been doing to DeSantis is using business to combat him, i.e., Disney, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, you know, they're upset that Disney can't spend another $1 billion in the Orlando area, and I'm like, good. Disney don't need no more land or revenue streams in Florida. It just doesn't. Like, right. You know, so if that's like, that to me is part of the problem. I definitely think this is a political stunt for sure. I don't know to what end. I don't know what it does specifically. You know, it's going to be ignored in a week, but
right. Well, you're not the only one, and well, me too, who believes this is a political stunt. So going on to Twitter, if you zoom out, thank you. Misfit Black Girl, we both know her. She made this tweet. How come Derek NAACP got all this smoke for DeSantis, but sat in that meeting with Biden and got cussed out clean with the rest of them civil rights leaders and said absolutely nothing? Where was the smoke when Biden was berating y'all, wagging his fingers, yelling, and carrying on?
Mm-hmm.
To be clear, this is in no defense of Satan. I just wish people would keep it consistent. Black folks have been harmed, abused, murdered, and treated as second-class citizens by all politicians in this country.
Yep.
If we're going to call out hostility towards us, call it out across the board. What does she mean by that? So remember this 2 years ago. Yeah,
Vaguely.
2 years ago.
Yep.
Actually, no, a little more than 2 years ago. So this is just shortly after Biden won, and he met with the civil rights leaders, and you could see Derek Johnson in the lower left corner screen. He was present, right? So they were basically giving Biden their demands.
Yep.
And this was in 2020. So this is coming off of George Floyd and all of that mess that was happening that summer into that fall during the election. Hunter Biden for Congress tweeted out, the good old days when 8 civil rights leaders were lectured by Jim Crow to stop bitching about clocks. So I'm going to play a little bit because this was nearly 2 hours of this Zoom meeting. But I do want to kind of play the part where actually Derek Johnson asks Biden in terms of, what he's going to do in connection to police reform. And Biden just essentially gave him the verbal middle finger. So we're going to play that. Again, taking a walk down memory lane just for you guys to remember, what was being said when all these leaders, they say Black people got Biden the presidency. So now here are these leaders making demands, and Biden basically says pick rocks.
Go ahead. You've mentioned more than once how the Black vote saved you in your races in the Senate in Delaware. You've talked about your friendship with Mouse. We are now saying the Black community have stood up in this election cycle. Let's not suffocate the Black vote in Georgia and make sure we send the right message, because the success of this administration will be the ability of the Senate to confirm your nominees. We have an opportunity here, and we want to make sure we seize upon this opportunity and allowing for the input necessary. 10 more appointments to go. A lot of people in our community are getting a little anxious because they are not seeing enough of the progress they thought they would have seen at this point. Let's not disappoint them, and let's not get to a place where voters in Georgia begin to second guess.
Okay, let me respond. I've got to go. Let me respond. There's a lot to respond to here. Let's get something straight. You shouldn't be disappointed. What I've done so far is more than anybody else has done this far. Okay?
No.
Number one. Number two, I mean what I say when I say it.
No, you don't.
I mean what I say when I say it.
When?
I'm the only person who's ever run on 3 platforms that I was told could not possibly win the election, and I never ceased from it. One was on restoring the soul of this country because of what I saw happen in Charlottesville. That was it.
People thought you were going to not win the election by returning the soul of the what does that even mean? What does that mean, sir?
No one else was talking about it.
Yes, they
the
were.
Words of presidents matter.
Plenty of people were.
Plenty of people were, and it still didn't mean anything. That's like, I said I was going to do good, and people thought that I wouldn't win by saying I'd do good.
Nobody else, no progressive, was talking about it. I did.
What do you mean?
My son Bo used to have an expression. He'd say, remember, Dad, home base. It ain't worth the job if I can't say what I believe.
What did Hunter say, though?
I didn't want to run this time. I ran this time because of the racist son of a gun who was president of the United States of America. That's why I ran. And you remember, a lot of you told me talking about the soul of America was going over people's heads. They didn't know what we're talking about. The words of a president matter. What a president said.
Yeah, we still don't know what you mean by the soul of America. They actually brought up a good point. What does it mean? The soul of this nation, if you want to be for real, was based on the exploitation and murder of my ancestors, of the ancestors of African slaves who were brought over to this country, as well as the Native Americans. Is that what you mean? Mm-hmm. Essentially, capitalism to the point of killing my former family members.
Yep. And, exploiting the global south and war and murder and death and pestilence.
Says matters. And you've never seen me shy away. In the middle of the debate, I called him a racist. In the middle of the debate with him,
Don't be rude.
I took on white supremacists. I'm the guy that took on every single time.
Pause. It's funny how the person next to him in one debate did say racist, but made a heavy implication that he was.
Right. And it's also this lady in a debate was asked about how her truancy law, and I mean she was prosecutor in chief of California. So,
Right.
you know,
But you notice here, these black leaders just sat there and took it.
they also aren't happy with what's being said.
They're
I
not
mean, you can
happy,
tell.
but clap back.
Yep.
Clap back.
Mm-hmm.
They just sat there like assholes.
Yeah.
Like, head of the NAACP sat there being berated by Biden. You know, asking, I would argue, a very valid question. Like, what are you going to do for us now that we essentially helped you get elected? We got rid of Trump. Now what are you going to do?
Right.
And Biden says, I've already done what I needed to do.
I've already said stuff. I've said stuff.
So shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And know your
Somebody
place.
was threatened in this country. The only white boy you know who did it, period, out there. Every single time.
No.
So look, all I'm saying here is, guys and ladies, we're on the same exact page. The same exact page. We talked about closing the racial wealth gap. That's the single biggest thing I want to get done. It's the ultimate equalizer, no matter what else happens.
You haven't done it.
Because I plan on spending over $15 billion to provide for opportunity for young black entrepreneurs to get them off the ground, black farmers to be able to
capitalism.
Pause. But here's this. Wouldn't that have been a nice message if he actually did this to when he spoke to Howard?
Yeah, but the black businesses he's talking about is like things that will help the machine anyway. Like,
right. But you can make the argument, you know, like at least he's offering something economic. Now, we can get into the ideology of capitalism versus socialism, like whatever, another day. But ultimately, we want it to be more in terms of, you know, people owning the means of production. You know?
Ice Cube, day one. Trump gone,
Trump
now
gone,
what?
now what? Right.
And he's getting pushed back again. We're saying the same thing, and people are like, and he's like, man, y'all need to listen.
Own their own property. Young people being able to get their first $15,000 down payment on a home, making sure that they have an opportunity to gain wealth. We can do all the rest of this unless the black community is able to make up the wealth gap. In my humble opinion,
it's their fault.
Real trouble.
Like, unless they make up the wealth gap, who made the wealth gap? Who did that?
Yeah, and it's just funny how, like, a lot of Democrats and, you know, Jamal Bowman, you know, I went off on him on Twitter today, and I saw him earlier, basically calling, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, you know, like a white supremacist, when he defends this guy who perpetuates that white supremacy, you know, in the country. He doesn't call him out. If he does, he's very tepid, you know, in terms of his response. But he could go very hard on Marianne, just the same way as Derek Johnson can go very hard on DeSantis. But it's like a bitch with Biden here.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so it's good that I think a lot of black people are just like whatever to this, you know. But and I don't want to say it's a non-story because I think this just kind of speaks to, unfortunately, the weakness of the African American community in this country in terms of like we don't stand on anything, we don't call out our leaders on anything, you know, out of respect or whatever terms, you know, like in line of, you know, not looking like an asshole, I would guess, say. But doing more damage in hurting the people that you allegedly supposed to help in the process, because at the end of the day, nothing gets done. And no one's being challenged in terms of, in Biden's case, what he ran to do. And like, always relying on the black vote to push him over the line in terms of him being reelected, and not getting any tangibles out of our votes, of our time, of our energy towards the Democratic Party. And so, yeah, I'm getting tired of the idea of like, and now I see even the squad doing this, is that, oh, Republicans are doing X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, Biden's still president.
Yep.
Like, there's still a lot he can do, and it's still a lot he should be challenged on, and not just being like, oh, I disagree with Biden on this, but Republicans, though.
Right. Yep. Well,
But
speaking
anyway.
of people we should help,